Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. A year in, and the Prime Minister is for turning as Labour rebels force a climb down on welfare. The third U-turn this month. Has Sir Keir Starmer's credibility been damaged beyond repair? The Alloa and Grangemouth MP Brian Leishman is one of the most vocal dissenters in the Labour ranks. He will join me this morning. And an election is never far away in politics these days. We'll vote for a new Holyrood Parliament, of course, in just 10 months' time. So how healthy are the parties as they try to win us over? We'll assess all of that. And after we've done that, it is over to Andrew Black on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Morning, Andrew.
Morning, Martin. We're going to be hearing from campaigners who represent carers and disabled people. They say that the UK government's welfare reforms will still hit the most vulnerable. Workers at a company in Fife have been warned they might lose their jobs after one of their big suppliers, Alexander Dennis, announced plans to move operations to England. And Gaelics public service broadcaster has had to cut programmes. They say they have a £10 million funding shortfall.
All right, more on all of that from Andrew at 10:30. Thanks for that, Andrew. Let's get on with the show. Yeah, loads to discuss this morning. As ever, you can have your say on what you hear. If something's got your goat, let us know. Drop us a note on social media. Use the hashtag BBC Sunday Show. Right then, Sir Keir Starmer has been practising a bit of compromise this week. He is hoping that by scrapping the most controversial elements in his government's welfare reform bill, the bill itself will be able to survive. But it's his third U-turn in a month, and now he's being accused of committing too much compromise. These are my principles, but if you don't like them, I have others, all that stuff. That's the accusation that's being levelled at him by an ever-expanding group of Labour rebels who have forced his hand again. We should say at this stage, Scotland runs its own disability welfare system, which won't change. But by the end of this decade, the total cost of welfare support in the UK is expected to top £100 billion. That's a few years away, of course, but for some perspective, it's twice what we currently spend on defence and almost a tenth of all the public money we have at the moment. So is that justifiable? Is it even affordable? Well, let's try and find out, because one of the most vocal rebels in the Labour ranks is the MP Brian Leishman. He is here with me now. Welcome to the Sunday Show. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
Where are we now with this welfare reform bill? Second vote next Tuesday. Will it pass, do you think?
I hope not, and I'm certainly working to make sure that it doesn't, because quite frankly, the concessions that were made at the tail end of last week, they are not enough. The sensible thing to do, the common sense thing that the government should do, is to withdraw the bill and actually consult with organisations and charities that are experts in this field and come back to the table with a proper welfare system.
How many of the other rebels have you spoken to? Do you get the sense that some of them have been satisfied by the compromise that the Prime Minister has made?
I would think it's fair to say that some have been placated by the compromises and the concessions, as they're called, but there is still a healthy amount of us, a big cohort of MPs that feel that this should be withdrawn.
So do you think it will pass? You say you hope it won't pass. Do you think it will pass?
I say that behind the scenes there's conversations being had all the time. It would be some sort of prediction from me, but my gut reaction would be that there is enough of us to make the government think again.
Right, so a lot of your rebel group were of the opinion that this was actually decent policy but badly implemented. Are you saying to me this morning this is just bad policy, that the disability welfare system shouldn't change at all?
No, it does need to change, but these proposals, this is not the change that we need. What we have seen, Martin, over the last decade and a half has been chronic austerity that has really impoverished some of the most vulnerable people in the country. It's been politics and policies by design to make people poorer. The notion that we solve these austere cuts with more cuts, that's frankly ridiculous.
Right, so here's a quote from Sir Keir Starmer yesterday, talking to the Welsh Labour conference. The benefit system is broken. People get trapped in it and written off, and so fixing it is a moral imperative. Do you agree with that?
The moral imperative is not putting people into poverty. Let me just say from the outset, of course, if people can work, I'm all for people working. That the self-esteem that brings and the economic benefit to the country is manifest and very, very clear. But that cannot be done at the cause of disabled and vulnerable people being put into poverty.
But you do agree that getting people off benefits and back into work is a laudable ambition?
Yes, absolutely, of course it is. But how we do it is the important thing.
So can you afford the benefit? We were talking there about the amount of the benefits cost. Working age health-related benefits. So people who get health-related benefits just now but are of an age where they could work, given their age, that bill was £36 billion 5 years ago. At the moment, it's £52 billion across the UK. It's expected to be £66 billion in 5 years' time. That means it'll almost have doubled in a decade. Wes Streeting was just telling Victoria Derbyshire this morning, 1,000 more people every day are going on to disability benefits. That's not sustainable, is it?
Well, what I think we've got to do, Martin, is we have got to look at the real reasons of why the welfare bill is escalating to the extent that it is. When we look at what austerity has done, if we look at over the last sort of 14, 15 years, what we have seen is a kind of triple whammy. We've seen austerity, as I say, politics and policies that by design have made people poorer. Then we've seen a global pandemic where wealth inequality accelerated and exaggerated at an absolutely incredible eye-watering rate. And then what we've still seen is the third thing, is a cost of living crisis. People are becoming poorer. And I'm sure we're going to touch on this later on in our conversation. How do we get a second term? Well, it's quite obvious for me. Let's improve people's living standards. What we've got to do is we've got to look at the real root causes that are destroying society, and that is poverty, low-wage economy, a struggling NHS that has been consistently underfunded, public services that have been decimated. That's the real root cause of the poverty that we face.
OK, the root problem that your government faces is that it doesn't have enough money to do what it wants to do, and it doesn't know where it's going to get the money it needs from, right? I mean, that's a really basic analysis of where your government is. Where do you suggest they get it from? Because they can't afford all these benefits. They know that, and that's what they're saying.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that is imperative, because as an ex-small businessman, I was always faced with two options. Number one, do we cut costs? Or number two, do we raise revenues? Now, instead of this relentless race to the bottom that cut after cut after cut ultimately leads to, and a decimated society, what we've got to do is let's have a look at how we raise revenues. Now, one of the things that I have talked about extensively in my first nearly year now as a parliamentarian has been the introduction of a 2% annual wealth tax on multimillionaires with assets of over £10 million. Now, what that would generate is that would generate in the region of £24 billion per annum. Now, that is real Labour Party policies, in my opinion, of trying to equalise society through redistribution of wealth and power.
Right, but in the real world, the argument is, I mean, I don't want to get into the laugher curve with you or anything, but what that actually generates is an enormous amount of money leaving the country.
No, I would respectfully actually push back on that, because when we look at what Tax Justice UK and Patriotic Millionaires, two organisations and bodies that have been fantastic on this issue, what they've said is they've actually found out that 68% of multimillionaires, around about that 20,000 people in the country, they approve of this idea. And what they want to do is they want to try and equalise society and generally improve people's living standards.
So why is that not being done now? Why is the Labour Party not doing that right now? Why do you think?
Well, that's an excellent question. I've asked the Chancellor in Treasury questions, and I will be revisiting with her, because the whole reason being for our party is to redistribute wealth and opportunity right across society for the benefit of the many.
You have been an MP for less than a year. You're very well known already, far better known than most backbenchers who came in last year's intake, and it's probably because you've been at the vanguard of a lot of the rebellions against the Prime Minister. I mean, some people would say you're trouble, other people would say you're just doing your job. What I'm going to ask you is this really the party for you? Because you seem to dissent on most of their major policy decisions. Well,
Martin, as I've said, and what I say too when I go to Labour Party meetings, I've got two fantastic constituents, Labour parties in my constituency, when I speak at outside events, is that I'm proud to be a Labour Party member. For me, the Labour Party really is the vehicle, the most likely vehicle to achieve a much more equitable and fairer society. Now, there are some things that quite clearly and openly I disagree with in the party, but as one Labour Party member, what I've got to try and do is I want to try and shift the party to where I think it should be.
Are you proud of their first year in government?
No.
Why?
Because I don't think that we have tackled. Let me just say, let me just embellish that a little bit. We have done some things in our first year that only a Labour government will ever do. The Employment Rights Bill, a phenomenal piece of legislation, generational improvement for workers, absolutely fantastic. And the other thing is that she's been absolutely terrific for many constituents in my constituency, over 400 in fact, was the restoration of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. Now, those are two policies that only a Labour government will ever do. Have we done enough of those types of things? For me, no. But that's my job to try and make us do them more often.
And broadly, when you're looking at the balance sheet, then the debit column is higher than the credit column. You've made more mistakes than you've got things right if you're not proud of what they've done so far.
I think that's only fair to say. I'm going to be open and honest with you, because I'm not from a political background. to caveat that, I was a councillor for 2 years, and then before that, I joined the Labour Party in 2016. I never worked for an MP or an MSP or some sort of NGO or think tank. I was a golf professional for 23 years. I'm now a Member of Parliament, and I want to deliver honesty in my role.
OK. It's difficult fighting the cause for a party that you believe is failing. Do you think you've got the right leader?
I'm not interested in the personnel. What I want to do is I want us to improve the tactics.
Hang on a second. You can't wriggle out of it that easily. The leader of the party, the Prime Minister of the country, is fundamental to your party's success in the future, right? So do you think you've got the right man in charge?
Well, what I would say is I think looking at some of the front pages today is I think that the Prime Minister has showed that degree of honesty that I think the electorate will actually appreciate. He admits he's made mistakes. It's 1 year in and hopefully a full 5-year term. We've got to do better. Of that, there's no doubt.
Does he listen to his backbenchers? How often have you spoken to him?
I haven't had any conversation with the Prime Minister.
Have you met him?
Beyond my Prime Minister's questions.
Have you met him?
Yes.
How often do you meet him?
I have met him 3 times in my first 11, nearly 12 months.
One-to-one?
No.
How many people were in? Well, you've been in the same room, is it?
Collectively at Downing Street 3 times, that's right.
Right, OK. Do you think he listens enough?
No.
To the party?
I think that's quite clear, and I think that is some sort of feedback that myself and many other colleagues in Parliament have passed on, that we've got to, and you said about me being a kind of, was it vanguard of rebellion? That's not my position, but what I've got...
Well, it has been your position, demonstrably.
What I have got to do is, and all backbenchers have got to do, is try and be that guidance for the leadership. We should be consulted much more on policy, and I hope going forward we will be.
The thing is, right, rebellion is addictive, isn't it? And now there's a rump of backbenchers who know they can make the Prime Minister dance to their tune. They did it overnight on Thursday night into Friday. What happens next? I mean, is his credibility now shot?
No, I wouldn't say his credibility is shot. No, not internally, and I don't think within the country either.
But you just have to look at the Tories to know that actually this is habit forming, isn't it?
In what manner, sorry?
Well, because for Prime Minister after Prime Minister, there was a backbench rump. There was the 1922 committee who knew that if something came in politically that they didn't agree with, they'd just turn it around or boot them out.
Well, that's fine. That's a degree of accountability that I think is healthy. Internal party democracy is crucial for the success of any political
party. Right, he's stuffed then, isn't he?
No, I wouldn't say so. It's not irretrievable for him.
Do you think he's the right man to take you into the next election?
I think the next election is 4 years away, and I think we've got to see, as you said, a demonstrable change in culture from the government.
That's not a yes, is it?
No, that was the answer I'm given.
Right. What about Rachel Reeves?
In what manner?
Do you think she's the right Chancellor?
I think what I've just said about the Prime Minister could be applicable to the Chancellor. As I said, and I've said this twice already, we have got to be the party that redistributes power and wealth across society, and that comes from the top and also the Chancellor.
It's a fundamental shift you're asking for, though, isn't it? Because they're quite a centrist party, and you're a very left-wing politician, and you're asking that they move to your politics. It's not going to happen, is it?
That's my role, and that's what I've got to try and do, because when I attend Labour Party meetings and when I go out and I hold surgeries with constituents and when I speak with people just generally in the street when I'm out and about my constituency, they want redistribution of wealth and power across society. We've got to fundamentally change something, because the last decade and a half of politics has been proven to only create gross inequality. But
you had a leader who promoted that in 2019 in Jeremy Corbyn, and he led you to the worst general election result in modern history.
Well, I would say I don't think it's really applicable to rake over the coals of something that happened 5-6 years ago. But what I will say as well is there was many things. There was obviously Brexit was the pretty much dominant issue at that time.
Do you think this cabinet could become the kind of cabinet you would be proud to serve?
I think so, yes.
But they're a long way from it now.
Oh, I think it's a journey. They're on a political journey. We're talking about our first... all these cabinet ministers, well, with the exception of Ed Miliband, I believe, certainly they're learning on the job. But we don't have time to take ages in getting it right.
What about Scottish Labour and Asarwar and the Scottish Labour MPs who sit on the benches around you in Westminster? Are they any closer to where you are politically?
Speaking with parliamentary colleagues, we saw, I think, a dozen 11 other colleagues sign the reasoned amendment from last week as well. So I think that does say that there is a good cohort of Scottish Labour MPs that don't agree with these welfare reforms.
Right. Do they tell? How often do you speak to them?
Oh, regularly, yes. I've got friends in the group.
They don't speak out much publicly about it, do they? I mean, there's this accusation, right, there's a branch office up here, they've been sent to Westminster to kind of just toe the party line. You're the only one we ever see putting their head above the parapet and criticising what the government's doing.
Martin, I can only look after myself. I basically have to...
Is it fair criticism?
No, I'm not going to criticise colleagues. I'm not going to do that at all, because, you know, we have got... What I will say is as well is, and I do have a personal relationship with many in the group, We're talking about fantastic constituency MPs. They're out and about in their constituency, meeting organisations, solving problems for their constituents. They're fantastic MPs.
You enjoying the job?
It's the best job in the world.
Better than being a golf professional?
Far better than being a golf professional. Although being a golf professional did have its moments, but no, it's the greatest job in the world.
I'll believe you. All right, Brian Leishman, listen, thank you very much indeed for sharing that. We will hear more from you, I'm sure, between now and Tuesday, but thanks for now. Right, let's speak now to our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr. He's been down in Westminster all this week, smelling the air, following these political machinations. Andrew, we just heard from Brian Leishman. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, Martin, as you said there, he is making a bit of a name for himself, isn't he? I was saying during the week that he is the rebel with a cause. He came out against these welfare proposals back in March. He is stuck with his opposition, and now, in a sense, he's been vindicated by the fact that 11 of his other colleagues have come on board with that opposition. He is quite an unusual figure in this new 2024 intake of Labour MPs. He is very old Labour, isn't he? I think he's been praised by the Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride, who said that Labour does need true socialist voices within the party. But others in his party, in Scottish Labour, would argue that they take a far more pragmatic, realistic view, and there's quite an old socialist Labour argument that actually you don't want people on the dole, you want people in work. Although, as Brian Leishman says, how do you get people back into work?
Yeah, well, quite. And look, there's a big week coming up for the government in Westminster. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Brian Leishman says he hopes this bill doesn't pass. He accepts it's got a far better chance of passing now. It would be a surprise if it failed now, right?
I think that's right, Martin. It was a terrible week for the government just past. It reminded me of the old days of the Theresa May, Boris Johnson governments, and would the governments almost survive? I think we're looking probably around 50 rebels still. Brian Leishman was saying there's still that opposition. I have a feeling that perhaps the other Scottish Labour MPs might have been brought on board. The former Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, has been saying that she just needs to see a bit more of the detail, but she is likely to vote for the bill in that form on Tuesday. The Prime Minister is being very humble, saying he's taken his eye off the ball. He's been defending his staff as well and saying it's down to him. But this has been a man who's been in power for just less than a year with a stonking great majority, with these three major U-turns on welfare, winter fuel and the grooming gangs inquiry. It's been a tough year for the Prime Minister, and Brian Leishman not really giving him his full support.
Well, indeed, plenty to chew on. Andrew Kerr, thank you very much indeed for that. So a busy week at Westminster, but the Sunday show is going to change shape for a few weeks. We will still be on the radio every Sunday, of course. But like our Scottish politicians, the TV team and I are taking a bit of time off for a summer holiday. Scandalous, I know. But before we go, we thought it might be a good idea to have a look back on what's been a turbulent year in politics here and everywhere else, and take a look ahead at what's going to be a fascinating fight for the Scottish Parliament in 2026. And joining me to do that are the journalists Katrina Stewart and David Clegg, the editor of The Courier. Morning, both of you.
Good morning.
Good to see you both. Firstly, Katrina, what do you make of what you just heard?
Having such a large cohort of MPs was always going to be really difficult for Labour to manage, but I think there is surprise that there has been such a breakdown in discipline so quickly, and Brian Leishman is such a shining example of that. We heard him say, "I can only look after myself," and for Labour, they'll be hoping to try and bring these wayward MPs back into the fold. Leishman was also talking about looking forward to a second term, and speaking out so publicly, I think is going to be making that a lot more difficult than it otherwise would.
Well, quite. I mean, how much trouble do you think the Prime Minister's in, David? I mean, irrespective of whether this vote goes through, and as Andrew was just saying, it would be unlikely if it doesn't go through now, but there's still a cloud hanging there, right?
I think there's definitely a cloud, and I think the problem is, if you remember a year ago when the general election was happening, Sir Keir Starmer was standing basically on a platform of, I will bring stability, the grown-ups will come back in the room, there won't be the chaos that we've seen under former Conservative administrations. And if you look at the papers today, it looks pretty chaotic. By my account, there's two mistakes that Keir Starmer is apologising for and saying that he was distracted by other things at the time. That is not a good projection of being in control after a year in Downing Street. And I think listening to Brian Leishman there, it's very clear that there is a central tension there that is playing out in welfare, but also elsewhere that cannot be resolved, which is on the welfare issue, 11% of GDP. They need to bring the welfare bill down, but there's that MPs in the background there. They don't want cuts to their constituents. They don't want to have to defend this in constituent surgeries, but also they can't raise taxes anymore. We've got Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules. So if you haven't got enough money for what you want to do and you can't raise taxes, you're in a real bind, and it feels like that issue is just going to play out and play out and play out and on all kinds of different portfolios.
There's a whiff of toast this Sunday morning, isn't there, about perhaps the Chancellor, maybe even the Prime Minister? Is that too far to push it?
I don't think that we're going to see any resignations in the coming week or any sort of credible threats to their positions. But again, it is extraordinary that this early in 1 year along, there is talk, there are whispers of such unhappiness that is something that is being discussed behind the scenes. And David talks about mistakes that Keir Starmer's made that are present in the papers this morning. And he's really painted himself into a corner, because one of the criticisms of him is that he's not personable, he doesn't have a narrative, he isn't sort of able to connect on a human level with voters. And so what he's done is he's given this interview that's supposed to be giving a bit of insight into him, into his thinking, show a bit of personality, and that has landed really badly.
Yeah, there's another suggestion. I mean, he's in his defence, he's kind of saying, look, I was away on international business, I was trying to sort the world out, and then I come back on Wednesday and find a bit of a bin fire. So I sorted that out, got the rebels in check, it was sorted by Friday. Stick with the plan, it'll be all right. But it's pretty fair criticism to say you shouldn't come home to a bin fire if your team in Downing Street is doing its job properly. This guy, Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff in Downing Street, David, I mean, there must be questions about him now, right?
Well, it certainly feels like he is a figure around which unhappiness in the background amongst MPs seems to be circling around. I think it seems unfair to lay it all at his door, and Keir Starmer in the interview in the Sunday papers today is very much, I think he actually uses an expletive, which is the first time I've read him swearing about this sense that it's Sweeney's fault. I do think that speaks to a wider problem, though, which is that, and in fact you got into it a little bit with Brian Leishman earlier, which is Keir Starmer good enough at the soft skills of keeping the MP group on side using just personal relationships and personal dynamics? Now, we know that's very difficult in a group that size, but it's an important part of the Prime Minister's job to make sure that he is making those personal relationships so it is difficult to come on TV and slag him off in the way that we've heard earlier. And I'm not sure that is happening enough, and perhaps that's part of his personality. And equally, when we're talking about the dynamics that they're playing out this morning, there is this other issue that he's trying to be candid, he's trying to be open, he's saying, you know, I got this wrong, but I'm not making excuses, but I was dealing with, you know, the potential outbreak of World War III, which does seem like a fairly good excuse, but I'm not sure that he necessarily has the presentational skills to make that argument in a way that lands in the way someone like Tony Blair might have done back in the day.
Yeah, and before we leave the subject, let me just point out once again, Scotland has a very different welfare system and disability benefits are paid in a different way in Scotland. The Scottish Government is saying they won't be affected. We're talking about this morning because of the bigger narrative about the government's, you know, the government's performance.
And the amount of money that's being spent in Westminster is going to impact that Scotland welfare bill as well.
Look, let's turn away from that and look back to Scotland just now, because, you know, election coming up next year. The Scottish Government don't have the problems to seek either at the moment. Government is difficult. Health was the stick, once again, that was used to hit them with this week. Cancer treatment waiting lists, the worst on record. A survey out, I think it was a BMA survey this week, or the BMA highlighting a survey saying that a third of households now contain somebody who's opted for private health in the recent past. How damaging is this kind of stuff for the SNP government?
It is a hugely difficult problem for the SNP government, and you're talking about problems in the past week. This is every single week at First Minister's questions. Either Labour or the Scottish Tories are using the NHS as a stick to absolutely beat the SNP with. There don't seem to be any credible improvements. We heard this week John Swinney talking about the cancer waiting times, which are a massive problem. And he was saying, well, actually, the median numbers are better. nobody cares about that. If you're waiting a really long time for cancer treatment and you are terrified, you don't care that the averages are improving. And so they don't have a credible narrative about how they're going to fix these issues, but also week on week, there are more and more problems arising.
How harmful is this going into an election? I mean, it's almost like it's being baked in now. We hear about health so much all the time. Have we just got used to it, or is it really damaging?
Well, I'm not certain. I would say one interesting thing from my inbox at the newspaper as a newspaper editor is it's probably the thing that I get contacted about the most, concerns about the NHS, concerns about NHS waiting lists. What I've noticed in the way that correspondence has changed in the last year or so is that there is this shift that people just expect that they're going to have to go private for a vast amount of operations that previously we would have thought the NHS will sort that out for you. So that there's a baked-in lowering of expectations of what they expect from the NHS. But I do think that when, for example, this week it was cancer waiting times, that's something that's not going to be sorted by the private sector. Everyone's relying on the NHS for that. In my patch of Tayside, there was prostate cancer statistics that we were reporting on previously, and I actually thought I've covered waiting time statistics for so many years now that they'd lost the power to shock me. Well, they hadn't, because these were so disastrous. There was a case of one person who, after being told by his GP that they suspected he had prostate cancer and urgently referring him, it was 205 days until he started treatment. Now, imagine what it's like to be waiting for 205 days when you've been told by your GP that you have cancer. So this is a big, big problem. It is really emotional as well. People are angry, upset, and worried about it. And I think very much about the politics of it. It will depend on the Labour Party. Anna Sarwar, clearly he's focusing on it nearly every week at First Minister's questions now. But can he convince the public that Labour will do a better job of it? That if they give him the ball, that the NHS will get better?
Yeah, I mean, there would be an argument, the SNP, I'm sure, will make an argument that if you want to see how Labour govern, you just have to look at Westminster and all is not rosy in the garden there. Is this going to be a healthy election, do you think? I mean, there's independence, there's all sorts of other, the usual issues on the table. What's going to dominate?
Health is definitely going to dominate. Reform is going to dominate as well. I think voters are really concerned about the essential issues, so health, education, cost of living crisis. These are the really important issues. Independence, of course, is going to be a focus. It's going to be treated differently by the SNP and by Labour. Anna Sarwar has said quite clearly that on the issue of independence, he is just going to appeal to all voters and say, listen, just give us your vote now. We'll deal with independence further down the line. And that is stolen straight from the SNP playbook. It worked successfully previously for Salmond. It worked for Sturgeon. So John Swinney is going to be competing against that. Nobody really seems to know what to do about the rise of reform in Scotland. So I think it's not going to be about reform so much, but how everybody else responds to reform.
Just on the independence issue, I think one of the really interesting things about this election is that actually it's not going to be an independence election, and it's going to be the first election that's not an independence election for a long time in Scotland. I
wanted to talk to you more about that. I wanted to talk to you about the rise of reform. I wanted to talk to you about the amazing work your newspaper has done on university, all of that. But I'm hearing my ear. We're off here in 30 seconds. We can't talk about any of that. I'm really sorry, but people can go and find that work if they want. Thank you both, Katrina, David, for coming in. That is it, as I was saying, for me and the TV team on the Sunday show. Don't switch off. If you're watching on the telly, there is a little QR code. Go and scan that with your phone, take a picture of it. It'll take you to BBC Sounds. Keep listening. And